Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lewis. I am the online editor of Accountancy Today and I'll be hosting this session. I've been joined by a lovely panel where we're going to be discussing real-world examples of how data and AI are reshaping origination, service and strategy. So everyone, if maybe you can start by introducing yourselves, where you're from and a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Tash Frangos and I'm the Managing Partner of Hayes Mack. I've been leading the firm for the past 4 years and previous to that I was Head of Creative Media and Tech and Head of Corporate.
Hi, I'm Salmin Goya. I'm a partner at Cooper Parry and I lead origination for the firm. I've been there for 5 years and we have been experiencing an incredible amount of growth.
Hi, I'm Toby Austin, Founder and Chief Executive at Bowhurst for the past 15 years.
Hi, I'm Sue Staunton, Managing Partner of James Cooper Creston and have been in that role for the last 6 years.
Brilliant, thanks for coming here today guys. So to start, let's discuss smarter client origination and how firms are moving away from more broad generalised business development to highly targeted origination. Sal, to start though, I'd maybe want to come to you and talk about how unique it is, how to have firms which maybe can be seen in competition discussing the secrets and what's going on. How do you feel comfortable about doing this?
Well, I suppose we've always been about disruption and considering how do you do what we do in a better way. I mean, fundamentally, obviously, accountancy firms, the what we do technically has to be done in the same way. A lot of the stuff we do, because of its compliance, etc. But I think when it comes to how you position yourselves in the market, I think the key there is that different businesses benefit from different accountancy firms or different professional services firms based on who they are and what they do. The real value they receive is by going with the firm that is the best fit for them, to be honest. So for me, this kind of knowledge sharing isn't about just what can I pick up from my competitors. It's more about going, actually, is there an easier way for us to almost divide the market more easily and spend our time focusing on the clients who we will derive most value from working with us versus the people who derive working with others in a, being directed or going towards those companies that are more suited to them.
It's like a real win-win for both client and firms. Does everyone kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to Sal's point, this is such a new area. We're all kind of learning. And actually, I hope that we do learn something from one another in terms of what each firm is doing and take something away today. I think there's benefit in being open on topics like this.
So, Sal, how has data changed your approach to identifying and prioritising engaging prospects? And also maybe how you kind of train your teams as well. How does that change your approach?
The short answer is in every way. There's literally, since I joined 5 years ago, I think I joined a firm that was of a certain size and had gotten to that size based off creating a great brand and having great people. Right? I think a lot of firms grow that way. And a lot of that growth was ultimately dependent on the people that were in the firm, the networks they had, people acting on intuition and ultimately going out and engaging the market, being known in the market for being great at what they do. And so business was coming to them, etc. When I joined, the remit was how do you, on top of that, generate a lot more clients that are more aligned to the growth we're trying to achieve as a firm and taking us to that larger level and evolving the firm, I think, from what was a regional player to a more national player in this market. And I actually made a note in preparation for this where I was a bit like, actually sounds a lot like some kind of proverb. It was kind of like to sell, first, one has to truly understand kind of the value they bring and to whom. I think that is the fundamentals of selling, so especially services like ours. It was a bit proverbial, but actually it's absolutely true. It's one of the first things I did when I came to this firm was really about understanding, okay, what do we know about our actual client base? Who is actually engaging with us? And not just from a perspective of, if you asked everyone, they all had very different opinions. So it's quite difficult to just crowdsource that. Kind of need a natural, okay, let me get an objective lens on this to go, if we looked at the data in detail, and could overlay all of the traits and characteristics, then we can truly know who are the clients that are engaging with us and then crowdsource the why more so. So that was really useful, I think, as a starting point for us to then build off that and start moving into different markets and different areas where we had seen some traction, but what was the market opportunity and how could we capitalize on it. Once you'd done that, then it was about understanding, okay, what opportunity sits out there for us to go and win? How do we then go about building that? What kind of strategy we're going to adopt? And that was all fueled by the data itself. You couldn't build that strategy without the data. And as we grew and grew, we had to constantly keep evolving the brand and keep looking at who we were hiring. So it impacted all of our hiring structures. It then impacted the direct go-to-market team that I was building and how those individuals would engage with the audience. So in essence, it changed everything. And going back to that point I made earlier around that almost fit equals value, as well, it allowed us to go, well, where are we going to play, but where are we also not going to play? Because there's certain parts of the market where it just didn't make sense for us to even go into, based on either what we had already in terms of our credentials and the skills we had in the business, but equally, fundamentally, in terms of the way we delivered our services, we designed them to deliver value to a specific audience, which is very much that mid-market client who is looking to grow. So the stuff that's outside of that was stuff that we needed to remove in terms of just doing the whole typical thing of we'll do any work for anyone who's willing to pay for it. And I think that's the key, right? So then we could really go strongly to market on that, with that strong belief of we're genuinely going to clients who derive value from us, not just approaching everyone and hoping that somebody buys from us. So yeah, it's very much all driven by the data and what that data was telling us.
Tash, I was actually going to follow up with that, saying other internal behaviours or processes that need to be changed to make that work and make it more seamless.
Yeah, I think the concept of moving from like this individual intelligence point to actually it being a collective. And so you have got your tools that you'll use, Bohus, like you've got your CRMs, we've got something called IntraHive, which kind of maps relationships internally and gives you latest correspondence and things that are going on with that particular individual that you're going to meet with. And it's using all of that intelligence in a way to then create a much more bespoke conversation with the client. And as we continue on this path to automation, which our industry is in the midst of, and there'll be further to go, that is where the value is going to be. And so it's also then thinking about what skills do we need to equip our partners and our directors and all the team with, because actually the expectation will be that it's not just one department, the BD department, that this has to sit with. Everyone in the firm is going to need to be equipped with the skills to be able to have that sort of interaction with a client or potential client. I think to get the buy-in, you've got to really be clear on demonstrating like the what's in it for me as well. So you have to reward, I think, those types of collective behaviours, because it is a change for some individuals, particularly if they're senior in a firm where they have got their client practice and they've serviced it in that way as the lead contact. So how do you incentivize someone to change their behavior to actually now opening that book of business? And so we now sort of reward that kind of collective origination, if you like, and this sort of, because we have also got lots of examples now where we know that when we go to market as a team, we are much better at converting the opportunity and also converting it in a way which is providing the client with a range of services that are relevant to them. So I think it's sort of the training that's needed, it's the change of mindset, and also then the reward that comes with that.
Was there any maybe surprising changes or developments that you came from examining the data that you maybe wouldn't have expected if you say you didn't have that available? Was there any kind of pivots that were maybe you weren't expecting that then turned out to be successful?
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to, I suppose the starting point is very much one where, like I said, we came into a firm where kind of average audit fees would have been 20, 25K, things like that. And, I think there was even a belief in the business that actually clients of a much larger size wouldn't consider working with us at that point. The belief, I think, was as well that a big driver for the clients that we were bringing in was purely because of brand. And that brand was very much geared towards entrepreneur, owner, that type of audience. Whereas actually then, the data told us that the actual buyers ended up being CFOs, FDs, etc. So we pushed that angle a lot more, and it challenged that whole piece of, is the owner always making that decision, or is it a more finance-based person who's doing that? And we ended up obviously moving a lot of our focus and energy into those, which then evolved things like events we were hosting, who we were inviting to those events. A lot of the events prior to that were all about owners of businesses, etc. We moved into a much stronger angle around finance directors, CFOs, etc., roundtables, those kind of things for that audience there. And in turn, it led to a much larger, much bigger engagement.
So when we're talking about in terms of as well, looking for market signals and using real AI-driven data in terms of market insight, have you got any real life examples or strong tangible examples of where that's maybe led to earlier engagement?
Absolutely. I mean, feels like I've been teed up for this with for Bowhurst, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was one of the first things I did when I came into the firm again was straight away really push in on that angle with Bowhurst, and especially for our tech and high growth audience, it was one where already historically in a previous role I'd used it extensively, and so I think when we came in here, it was the first thing I did. It was kind of, so if we want to supercharge that area of the business, Bowhurst is the way to go. And there's an example of a client who had done a large Series B round, had brought in a new finance director, CFO, and we knew, having experience working with a lot of those clients a number of times, when we approached that client, we could be very clear from the outset on, this is the reason we're approaching you, this is why we're approaching you now, and we can articulate value at all these stages that we know are coming now for you in the next few years. And so we could position the whole firm to provide a solution to them that was going to be extremely value add throughout the next few years for them. So straight away, it was almost a no-brainer. It'd almost be foolish for them not entertain that conversation. And then equally, there's that timing piece, right, which is crucial in what we do. And you can just constantly canvass the market and hope that you catch someone at the right time, or you use triggers like that to be, okay, now I'm reaching out to you. The reason I'm reaching out to you is for this reason. And as well, I think clients appreciate that more as well. It's that whole piece around, GDPR talks about legitimate interest and things like that, but actually, it's not really about the GDPR circumventing that. It's actually about, well, if I'm being approached by anyone to sell me a service, I want to know that person is actually coming to me with something that is going to add value to me and can articulate why it's going to add value to me. And I'll entertain that. I won't entertain somebody coming to me and just hoping they've caught me at the right time to pitch me wherever they're trying to pitch me. And I think that's a really important point.
I think it's the fact that also once you've identified a target and done your initial research, and it might not be the right time at that point, you then previously would have had to manually make sure you really check in on that to see when is the right time, whereas 100%. All of that can be automated now.
Absolutely.
Sue, how do you think that maybe affects how the selectiveness and how firms are being selective of who they work with? Are they becoming more or less selective in terms of when you've got that data you can target?
I think it makes it so much easier to be much more selective. So it's not just about size of client, or it's the sectors that they're in, and it's the sort of services that you can perceive that they actually want. And it comes back to Sal's point, you can match what you as a firm can really offer to a client and what you think that client is going to need. And I think the sectorial thing is really, really critical, because clients and potential clients want you to be involved within their sector. Being involved within their sector means you need to understand what's going on. And that's why I think, the way in which we can get data now about movements, key things that are happening. A couple of years ago, I was getting constant feeds from particular websites and so on, newsletters, just trying to keep up to date with exactly where movements were, where funding was going, and where it was coming from. And now with data, such as drawing from Bowhurst, is so much easier to do that. And then you can paint a picture, and you can sort of you can phone up a client or a potential client, and you can have a valuable conversation with them that's valuable from their perspective, not from your perspective. You sort of say, I know you're in the middle of a fundraise at the moment. Have you thought of looking at so-and-so? I've just seen they've just exited from XYZ company, so they've got a bit of money sat there. Or I know that they're interested in this particular sector, which you're right on the money for. So I think it's enabled us to be much more fine-tuned in terms of those clients that we're going for. I think in the past, accountancy profession has perhaps rested on its laurels quite a lot and just assumed that client A would stay with them for years and years and years and years. And I think now clients are rightly becoming more demanding. They want people who are very much more engaged in their business. And so the ability of us to draw on data to, again, talk to them knowledgeably about what it is that worrying them is that much more valuable.
Sue makes a really good point there. I think there was that inertia in the market a while ago, wasn't there, where kind of you just didn't get that as much movement. We have to keep working harder. We have to keep being better at what we do to ensure that we keep those clients as well as bringing new clients. It's
also good with staff too, isn't it?
Yeah,
because
100%.
if you can enable them to feel more engaged with the client, i.e. because of the data that they can get relatively easily and absorb, then it's more engaging for them, more interesting for them, and that comes over to clients and potential clients as well. I hate it if I've got somebody go out to a client doesn't understand what the industry is that the client is actually in. And that has to go right the way down to the most junior people within the team.
And that comes all the way back to your point around the whole team needs to understand everything when it comes to CRMs, etc. They need to be really detailed on how did we engage that client, what did they engage for, what are the things that they expect from us, and make sure that we're delivering to those across the board, as well as then that tying into outbound teams, marketing teams, ensuring that the brand keeps evolving to what clients want, what the market wants. And so it's literally across everyone, from the partner who's leading the relationship through the team that's delivering the work, through everything, sales and marketing.
Yeah, I agree. To Sue's point, it's more interesting, isn't it, I think, for our trainees, our associates, to be engaging with clients in this way. And frankly, what hasn't changed is the value that clients place on an advisor. That, in my view, hasn't changed. But what they are expecting is more engagement, because they know that there is automation happening to deliver the service. And so what's going to keep them sticky is that relationship. And
Absolutely.
so therefore the richness and the content of that conversation matters even more. And that's where, again, the data adds to the richness of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Toby, just from your perspective, I just wanted to hear about how businesses sometimes respond when maybe that data, the data they're receiving challenges what their intuition was, what they thought might be the case. What's your opinion on how accepting they are of that, and also how they go moving forward?
Yes, it touched on Sal's point from earlier. Intuition is always going to be based on quite a small, relative to the full market, set of experiences of that individual, and therefore there will always be some biases in that as well. What we see across our client base is, firstly, the inevitability that the data will challenge that intuition, usually very quickly. The clients who are happy to lean into that are the ones who will end up evolving and growing. What we always encourage people to do is to test and iterate. If you're there with an open mind, the data is saying, for example, this looks like a fantastic client for you, but your intuition is screaming, I'm not sure about that, that looks like a waste of time. Try it. It's actually a relatively low investment to go and figure out whether the data is right or your intuition was. Go and try and have that conversation, record what the result is, and then either you will end up going, well, actually, maybe we're not quite using the data in the right way, and you can feed that back into your systems and processes upstream, or quite often more likely, it's something that can help you evolve your intuition over time. I think it's important to note that data and intuition are not two separate principles here. They're not. The whole point about adopting data as a kind of in your firm-wide culture is to evolve everyone's intuition and adapt it in that data-driven way, so you end up with better outcomes for the firm.
Obviously, with automating kind of routine work, it frees up other time that would be spent into more worthwhile issues. Sue, I'd like to come to you. I was wondering if and where maybe you've seen the biggest efficiencies gained from automation.
The obvious one that people always talk about is that AI can do the heavy lifting. So it can do the population of the tax return, or some of the extraction of information from client records for audit, and that is really important, and it's a massive mind shift for a lot of people. But it can be transformative, because it then changes people's experience of being an accountant or being a tax advisor, because they're not concentrating on the putting number A into slot B, and they can then stand back and be objective and look at what are those numbers actually telling them. That's the real prize. The second element of it is it enables people to have more agency over the way in which they organise their working life and the way in which they deliver. So, we've got various tools in-house, Copilot, for example, and different people use it in very different ways. But it doesn't mean to say it's any less, it's probably more effective because we're not mandating you've got to do it this way, because the tools themselves have so many different applications and ways of working. And I think that's good. So the benefit we get from that is actually people feel more autonomous. And so that then comes to, what does it enable people to do? And what do we do with the time that's saved or the resource that's saved by not putting data into spreadsheets? And that's about, coming back to Tash's earlier point, it's about this advisory piece. Clients really value the engagement. And that's, that is the interesting thing. And so we're in the middle of doing a lot of work as a firm about how do we help our teams, right from the earliest trainee up to partners, to become more effective advisors. What are the tools they now need in terms of soft skills, of how they interpret the data that they're getting, because there's a big piece around that. Whereas in the past, you go to a client and you'd throw them a set of accounts. Well, we wouldn't throw them, but you'd give them a set of accounts, you'd give them the audit report, and that would be job done. But now actually, clients want a lot more. They want interpretation of what does it mean that this number here has moved? Where am I going to be if I continue on this trajectory? And you can use tools to help you to sort of predict what the forecast outcomes will be. But then then we could change that. If we changed that particular element by 10%, like if we reduced your expenditure on headcount by 10%, what impact would that have? And it's not just the linear, well, cut the cost by 10%. It's actually what resources, how would you then reorganise your resources and those sorts of things. So I think it's very much more that the impact of AI and data is going to be making accountants become again business advisors, because I think probably 20, 30 years ago we were advisors and we were trusted advisors to clients, and I think there's been this period where we've become very compliance based and delivering compliance based information to clients.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think actually that's a really exciting opportunity
Oh,
out of all of
absolutely.
this, isn't it? And we have, rightly so, obviously, been, as an industry, very focused on the quality of the work that we deliver, particularly in our very heavily regulated audit service line. And so this is an opportunity where we can actually shift some of that focus back to the bit that probably we also get more enjoyment out of as well, actually, and the client sees more value in.
Yeah.
I think sometimes talking about moving to automation, there's always people are a bit hesitant with the risks, whether how large or small they are. I just wanted to kind of put to everyone, how do you think you best go about managing those?
A massive risk for us as a sector, I think, is that how do we effectively train our trainees if they're not doing the basic doing? So when I started training, which was a very, very long time ago, we had this thing called, we used to use T accounts, and so you could see which side of the window your debit and your credit went, and so you really got to grips with the mechanics of accounting. We've moved on from that, thank goodness. But how do our trainees learn? And then from that learning, give them another ability to advise. So I think that actually, to me, is one of the biggest risks that we have, so that people are engaged and don't just skip over all that, because then you can't really give advice. And I had a massive lesson on that probably about 10 years ago, when clients said to me, well, it's, really like the service that you're giving, but your seniors or associates are sending us a list of journals at the end of the audit that are impossible to post because they're referencing nominal codes that just don't exist. And you sort of sit back and think, and that's because they don't understand, because they've not done the putting together of the accounts in the first place. They don't understand the way in which it works. Now that's less of an issue now because we're all using, particular packages and that sort of thing. But the point is, if people don't understand fundamentally, then how do they? So that is a massive risk for us, I think, because I think you can get over the bit about has AI got it right or not by the way in which you review and the way in which you ask. Let's say you've asked AI to pull out data in relation to a particular tax issue, and you have to make sure it's got the references are absolutely correct, and you go back to those references and that they are current. Because I'm sure we've all done that, where you put something in and you look at it and you think, well, that doesn't sound right, and then you realise it's from 1999 or something. So it's massively out of date.
How do you think firms can go about, again, not losing, say, for the associate trainees, but that is a grounding? Is there finding new ways to give them that experience, but still keeping the efficiencies gained by automation? It's got quite a fine balancing act, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's around the training. We have to change the training that we do, and it probably has to be more practically based training rather than theoretical. And that's something that we have to work on with our regulatory bodies as well. So the Institute of Chartered Accountants and so on need to think about, the exams that people do. Are those still the right sorts of exams given the landscape that we sit in?
Toby, I wanted to ask about kind of like the data signals that can help spot risks for clients and how automation is making it potentially easier and to spot it earlier as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the first point is that the data signals that are of use rarely come from financials or regulatory filings because by definition, they're at the end of the process rather than the start. So what we find with our clients is that it's actually looking at stuff that is as close to live as possible. So whether that is fundraising data or whether that's innovation data, or whether it's for example, something that's come out of news or people changes, all of these are really quite high signal data points that can unearth risk or indeed opportunity within a client. A good example that we get quite often back from clients is something like a company publishing a news article about winning a client abroad or potentially opening an office abroad. Now that kind of international expansion piece seems to be a very regular thing, where a company will go ahead and do that without necessarily really understanding the risks involved, the tax situation involved, the compliance issues involved, and so on. So if you're able to be monitoring your client base at scale and pick up on those things, even if you haven't spoken to the client for 6-9 months, you have no idea they were doing this. That's a fantastic thing for a client to receive, from you as a service provider. It is that I'm looking out for you behind your back, and that's likely to result in a very fruitful conversation and probably a much more pleasant conversation than when you do catch up with them at the 3 months after the year end, going, you've got a problem here, that's going to be expensive to fix.
That's really going to separate firms from the others, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I think even more than that, it's worthwhile noting that quite a lot of this comes from not just individual signals, but kind of patterns of signals. Leadership changes is a really good example there. Losing one senior person at one of your client firms, noticing that they have moved on, that could be something that you need to know about, particularly if they were perhaps your main point of contact there. But it's probably not a big thing for the firm itself. Noticing that they've lost 3 or 4 senior people in a short period of time, well, that's a really good indication that there's something going on or going wrong in that business. So understanding those signals, thinking those through, making sure you have the system set up in order to do that monitoring is absolutely key.
Tash, as Toby's mentioning there, that these are really good opportunities for firms to kind of stand out. If firms do that, and over time, do you think maybe this is going to lead to changes in expectations from clients? Maybe that start expecting this, and what does that mean for the firms that aren't up to speed?
It will become the norm, won't it? As in that will be expected as part of the client service. And if you're not sort of already starting to think in that way, there will be other firms that already are in a way, which puts the account at risk. the bit that we haven't covered, of course, but was in the news, I'm sure we all read that FT article a few days ago, is the impact that has on fee conversations with clients, where there is this expectation that surely tech's doing half of the audit now. And so what does that mean for my audit fee or my tax return fee? And so, it will be really interesting to see how the market responds to that, because it cannot just be a race to the bottom. There is much more value that this profession brings. We are valued advisors to our clients, and so seeing how the market responds to that is still a bit of an unknown, but will be incredibly interesting, because it won't be a conversation about hours times charge out rate. It will all be about the value that you're delivering to that client across a range of areas. And some of us are already doing it, but we're doing it as maybe client leads. All of our team are going to have to be able to talk like that, like from associate level and up. That way of thinking and talking about value can't just sit at the partner pool or the BD market-facing team.
Yeah, it's a huge mindset shift. And I think, touching on all those points, I think there's, I think clients right now, I look at when we're constantly monitoring, okay, what are the sources of the opportunities we're generating, where are they coming from, what channel they're coming via. And that piece around being predictive and proactive is something that comes up 9 times out of 10 now in every conversation we have when we're up against whoever it might be. And actually, weirdly, the bigger the business is, the less you have that level of proactivity and predictiveness, because they're so busy or because the clients they're working with are so massive. They work in quite a siloed way. Whereas actually the bit that then they're coming to us for is very much as Tasha said, I want an advisor who proactively approaches me with the things that I need. In fact, it's a bit of a weird one, because it's kind of one of those things that I think in our industry before, it was almost like, if you cross-sell, you have to be really careful because a client doesn't want to be cross-sold to. It's like, actually, they want the opposite right now. Right now, they want someone who proactively is going to me and saying, I've noticed all these things in the data that I've seen, and having worked with many clients who've been through that exact transition of just raised a Series B round and all these changes, or a PE house has come in and invested now, the MI is now going to be this, that they're going to expect is this, you're going to have upcoming transactions, here's some stuff that might be able to help you with those, anticipate those challenges, next rounds of due diligence, all that kind of stuff. They want you to be going to them with that, even if it means you're cross-selling them more services. It depends how you do it, right? If you're just going, hey, do you want to buy something else? Do you want to buy something else? It doesn't work. But if you're going to them proactively with looking at all this data and looking at what you've done so far, this is what we're anticipating you're going to need over the next year, 24 months. Do you want to start having that conversation now rather than get to a point where, oh gosh, I've got a problem. Can you help me, please? Which is what they're getting with no siloed environments where, I've got a VAT issue that's come up. You're an audit partner, but can you introduce me to someone? You might as well be working with 2 separate businesses at that point, because they're just going to come into you. Whereas that's what we've spent a lot of time aligning that behind the scenes. And that's one of the big, I suppose, what we'd call, I wouldn't call it a unique selling point, but it's certainly a selling point. And I think all of that gets driven by the data. We're building models in the background to keep looking at all of our client base and make sure that we can proactively approach a client at the right time with the right thing to make sure that they're not being left in that situation where they're caught short and suddenly need an emergency bit of help.
What Toby was saying in terms of the data that's available, there's a new, someone's expanding internationally in these jurisdictions. I think it's also then understanding that how people use their time is changing, because it's all very well having that data, but you almost then need to create the headspace to be able to interpret it in a really well thought out way to then action it, to act upon it. And that takes time, doesn't it? And you've got to create dedicated space to think about that.
And that's also a philosophical move, isn't it? Within a cultural shift within firms, because if you see somebody gazing into space, they're actually, and actually thinking, then there can be, some perceptionally, because well, why aren't you actually, at the keyboard? But we need to work out ways of providing that headspace, as you say.
Moving on to, again, more data-led strategy and how that can lead to, confident decision-making. Tash, maybe I want to come to you first on this. How has data changed how you assess new markets and sectors?
We are, as you will know, a sector-focused firm. So we go to market through dedicated sector teams, and that starts from associate level and up. And actually, when I think about how the firm went on that journey, which is more than a decade ago, that was using data. And it wasn't in the structured way that we have it now, but we started by, to choose which sectors we went into, we looked at, well, where are our current clients and where are we successfully servicing them? And that's how our first sectors emerged, and they are still present today. And the information that we now use to assess those, and some of them have been further segmented, that's with much more sophisticated data. So, splitting out, knowing that fintech is a key growth area in London in particular, and given our presence here, we have split fintech out of tech, out of FS, and created its own team. And so I think that is definitely a key way in which data has helped us think about what are the areas, where are we going to sell to Sales's point. We don't want to just sell to everyone and anything. It's where we have succeeded, and it has fueled the organic growth of the business, has been really with a targeted sector-focused approach. I would say then what we're now doing is, right, okay, so we can see the success that this area of the business is having in converting opportunities, but we can also see the ones that are struggling to convert. And is there a trend? Is there a trend by the team that are involved in those pitches? And so therefore what we're now able to do is have some intervention and have some conversations. And it would have been really hard to have had that difficult conversation in the past, because what are you basing it on? Okay, whereas now we've got evidence. And so to the person hearing that difficult conversation, it enables them to get comfortable with the reason you're having that conversation, because you're giving them the evidence, and they understand, therefore, why we need to see a change in how we're operating. And therefore, it allows us to put the support around them to be able to initiate that change. So I think the data also enables a much more kind of trusting way in which decisions are made, and you get overall buy-in at the leadership level as well. And then that in turn impacts on where you spend the money and how you spend it.
So it's funny because the data took us a different route. And when we started looking at our data, essentially we went down the route of not necessarily sector, but actually ownership structure. And in our world, the reason why that was important was because actually what we saw was that depending on the ownership structure, the demands on the finance lead changed. And it was about, in a privately owned business, the focus was on various elements. Whereas if that business then took on private equity investment, actually their role evolved to a point of actually there was reporting became became much more intense. And, they were looking at the next event that was going to be upcoming, because inevitably PE is going to come out again at some point. And so what does it now do? It means that as we've done this big expansion throughout, it's kind of going, okay, before we go into any new territory, let's map it out by ownership structure, region. Let's look at the size of the opportunity there. That it will dictate who we go out and hire in those regions to try and approach those markets, make sure we've got the right skill sets going in. Like we said before, around kind of training our people, it allows them to also then navigate those and structure those conversations in a way that's a lot more value add again, but equally you can tell that story according to their traits and their requirements, not just what we want to tell them ultimately.
I was going to ask about your kind of both of your opinions there on how you made those judgments, and and how much you kind of adapted to the data and vice versa. If maybe your judgments were going to go against the data initially, how did you kind of navigate those?
I've got quite an interesting example of how the data changed my intuitive and what the sort of surface data was showing. So it was an area of the business that's been growing so well. And so on the face of it looks great because all the numbers are in green. And then we dug down and to understand where is the growth coming from. And there was a little bit of a worrying pattern that emerged, which is that actually a lot of the growth is coming from recurring stuff, but where you have limited touch points with the client. Whereas the expectation for that area of business is that you have quite regular touch points and you get really good recurring fee income. And so that kind of put a new kind of perspective on what I thought was a really, and it is still a really great performing area of the business, don't get me wrong. But what we were able to do is then have a conversation with the type of work that we're, with the leader of that business about the type of work that we're winning, and actually shifting the focus slightly to push for a service line where we have got more of that regular engagement with the client and more of a recurring fee rather than a once or twice billing kind of opportunity. So that is interesting to see, like how, you know, on the surface it all looked good, but we needed to dig down into the type of work that we're winning, the type of clients that we're winning, to kind of see that actually there could be a problem further on down the line. It might not be a problem this year, but it could be a problem in 1-2 years' time, because we're not going to have that recurring touch point going on.
Yeah, and that transactional piece is probably the key one in our sector, I think, where you've got recurring revenues versus transactional revenues. But I think, I think it's things like, for example, in terms of how it's shaped things, I'll go to market, you look at our website now, it very much has these structures now as the ownership structures as kind of as a main piece that people go on to. Well, you know, so now we've got these essentially what we call squads internally, where it's literally like you've got certain partners who have a particular concentration of clients in that ownership structure, for example, a lot sitting with BD teams, sitting with marketing people, sitting with originators, sitting with cross service lines, and suddenly the conversations they can have about how the various service lines are going to impact businesses in that space, and also get them to take that time out and think about, okay, in VAT, how is that likely to play out? And in, when it comes to due diligence or international tax, how is that going to play out? It just constantly fuels the outbound messaging to be a lot more specific to that audience. And like I said, we talk about that personalization at scale. That's exactly what we're talking about. If you want to be competitive, etc., you've got to act on a combination of instinct and intelligence, intelligent insight that you're getting from the data. I feel like, and I think I think it's Colin Powell, the ex-Secretary of State, did a whole 40-70 sort of thing, rule, whatever it is. Because rarely do we have 100% of correct data. It's just, it hardly ever exists. You never have perfect data. But if you act with less than 40% of the data, and you just act on an instinct, you're being a bit reckless, and you're probably going to miss quite a lot of opportunity. I think if you wait for more than 70%, then you may miss the boat completely. So you kind of need to act in this zone of like 40 to 70% to say, as long as my data is accurate enough and I can apply the instinct and the intelligence that I'm getting from not just myself, but my colleagues, everyone in the business, then you're in a really good place to be successful. I think if you leave it, like I said, you can leave it too long or you act too quickly, you can then make a mistake. So definitely data, etc., becomes crucial in any of those decisions, whatever you're doing, whether it's the market you're going to go into or whether it's the conversation you're about to have with a client.
Toby, when we're talking about, as I say, kind of capabilities in terms with data from client side, but also from firm side as well, what would you say are the essential foundations in order to get to the point where where Sal's talking about where they're truly kind of data driven? What are the foundations needed?
I think the first one is just cultural across the firm. There's you cannot do anything unless you have data at the heart of your company's culture, and that's actually quite practical. I mean, it means forcing a discussion about data at every point. You're thinking about opening a new office. Well, okay, where's the data that backs up that decision? You're thinking that potentially this service line is coming towards the at the end of its life. It's not doing as well as well. Okay, where's the real data to support that? And is there some contradictory data out there that might say, well, actually, no, maybe we're just doing something wrong here? Unless you have the culture across the whole organisation, right, from the most senior to everyone who's working day to day, then there's no real hope of ever adopting that kind of data-driven strategy. But obviously, that alone, culture isn't enough. You need your systems and your processes and your data. They need to all plug in together, and that's complicated. You need to make sure that they're the obvious ones. Your CRM, is it fit for purpose? Is everyone using it? Do they know how to use it? Your provider of data, people like ourselves, what's that allowing you to see? Can you get full coverage of the whole market and all of the signals that you're desiring out of that? You need to make sure that things like your billing systems all plug in together. Your AI tooling talks to all of that, because if it doesn't, then it's operating at least partially blind. And then I think the final part of the puzzle is you can put all of that in place and still people don't use it. So
There's a pointless exercise.
you still got to do the training, and you still got to build trust in those systems, and those are absolutely key. If you have people who are using those systems on a day-to-day basis and they're breaking or they're not providing the right information, then they lose trust very rapidly and will revert back to old ways of doing things. If you haven't trained them in how to approach those systems, in making sure that they understand when it's appropriate, for example, to use an AI tool and when it's not, or how to verify the output, again, it's very unlikely that you'll succeed in that transition. But if you can put those things together, the cultural layer, the training, the trust, alongside the practical side of the systems and processes, then you've got a good recipe.
When we look at from when I joined to now, the proportion of the amount of work that we've won that comes from outbound, from something that's totally unheard of, really. You've got people at executive level, not partner level, reaching out to decision makers who previously it was thought would never interact with anybody else. But actually, when someone can really articulate a relevant value proposition to you, it doesn't matter who's telling you that. If it's genuinely accurate, then it's a matter of, well, I'll react to that and I'll act on it. Whereas I think historically that just was never the case. I think, but that's we're only able to do that. These people are not, an expert in VAT for a food business, so they're not coming at it from a perspective of, I really know your sector and I know lots about this. They're coming at it from I can see the traits and I can see how we would add value to you. Would you be open to having that conversation? Suddenly, the volume of stuff we bring in is incredible from a team that is nowhere near the sort of seniority, etc. that you would add. But it gives you that scalability, because you can't always go and hire more and more partners at that level who have that reputation, etc. Otherwise, everyone's just scrapping over the same people. So even to grow the business and scale a business, we needed to have that kind of ability. And that was one of the things that private equity really bought into. It was the fact that we had the ability to do this. And obviously over the last few years, we've demonstrated how it works. So again, but that's all completely data driven. That doesn't work otherwise. Yeah. So there's a lot there that's really important there when it comes to that scalable model.
Are there really early indicators that these data enabled firms are winning more work at a higher level and retaining clients as well more efficiently?
We're in a privileged position of being able to see across quite a broad range of firms. It is crystal clear to us in our own internal data, the broader the adoption of data-driven use cases across advisory firms, the faster they're growing. It's as simple as that. And the ones that are doing the best in that are the ones that are adopting it for origination, for client monitoring, as we talked about earlier, for therefore identifying risks early enough, but also making sure that it's fitting into those strategic decisions. So you're taking data to make sure that you are setting the right strategic direction for the firm into areas of the market that are in growth, that are well served by your own firm's offering and culture and personality and so on. It is crystal clear, and I think demonstrated around here as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to come to you as well about the overall kind of competitive gap. Do you think this is going to lead to that kind of widening over the next couple of years? And if so, is it just those that are doing it well going to stand out most?
I mean, not to repeat what probably anyone who's listening to this has kind of heard about AI generally, but in essence, if you're not using the tools, all you're going to do is fall behind. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no logic to saying, "Oh, I refuse to use the tools," because otherwise you're racing a totally different race, right? I think
you're not racing, are you?
Exactly, you're not racing at all. And the fact is that I ended up being at a digital marketing thing a while ago, and there was a speaker there that was very much. It was like, you may be great at riding a horse, right, and racing a horse, and you're great, and but the fact is, the whole environment just changed. So suddenly you're not racing on grass anymore, you're racing in the water. So if you're still riding a horse now, and you're up against, other animals that are much more better equipped to, that's essentially where you're at. So if you're not on the right vehicle in that sense, you're going to struggle. And that's what this is. This is, if you refuse to adopt it, you're just going to end up falling behind because you're not racing on the right vehicle. You keep riding that horse, you're still doing it as well as you ever were. You're probably even better. But it fundamentally can't race in that same environment. The simple answer is get on board or get out, because you're going to fall behind anyway.
Yeah, just to move on to the kind of final segment today, I wanted to ask each of you one final question, and that is, what one practical step could a firm listening today take over the next maybe 90 days to become more data-driven? Sue, if I could ask you to start, please.
Well, I think for me, it's about communication internally, and it's about selling the dream as to what actually this means. So it's trying to take away the misconceptions, trying to take away the fear, and selling the story about what the accountancy practice of the future could look like.
Toby?
I think, communication is incredibly important in businesses. Actually, I think it probably depends mostly on where you honestly think you are in this adoption journey. Speaking to those who might fear that they're a bit further behind, maybe having listened to everyone here today, I would say use that 90 days to take a long, hard look at where you are as a business. Put aside some time, and it needs to be senior time across the firm. Ask yourself a load of questions. What data do we currently have access to? Do we know what has happened to each of our clients over the last 3 months, particularly if we haven't spoken to them? Do we have any way of understanding the trends in our different service lines? All of these questions and more. The AI one, of course, is there as well. Where are we using this currently in our business? Are we using this currently in our business? And if we are, is it giving us the results that we think that it is? And if you're not satisfied with the answers, then come and have a chat with us.
Sal?
It's actually quite well linked to that, but equally to probably one of the first points I made in this whole webinar, and it's around truly understand yourselves as a business. And if it was going to be it's not a simple exercise, but it's an instruction, it's something that needs to be rolled out across any business, is make sure that your CRM is genuinely populated with really rich data. I think once you've got that, it allows you to really start getting crazy insights into, okay, what actually is our client base? It just starts dispelling the myths that most people have about their own business, where, so-and-so just brings in loads of clients because they are just this magical sales creature. And it's like, well, it's not. It's just that they do something really well and consistent. And that's what gives you then the ability to truly scale. So I think, but it all starts from truly understand yourselves as a business. Make sure your data and your CRM is super clean, so that then you can carve it up. And because it's pointless having a good CRM if it's not full of rich data. That's the crucial bit. The crucial bit is start from a really strong data point to then do all that analysis and the planning and the strategy, etc. But data needs to be solid in the first instance.
Yeah, perfect. Tash, anything to add?
Yeah, mine was similar in terms of, map the data that you've got and make sure that it's really good quality, which is obviously more than a 90-day exercise,
Of course.
I have to say. However, also start embedding it into decision making. Like if you are at a relatively early stage on this journey in terms of how you use it, start embedding it and then seeing what benefit that has had. So choose some strategic decision areas that you've got to make some decisions on, and use the data to inform the outcome or the path chosen. And then where you've seen the positive impact that has had, talk about it, like really advertise that across the whole business. The more you do that, the more buy-in you'll get, and it will encourage others to follow and kind of maybe change their behaviours around how they interact and use data. And then on the sort of AI tools and the range and what's out there, I think don't just do it for the sake of doing it. Like, don't just use a new tool. Like, really think about what do I want to solve or address in my business to make a quicker decision, make a process more efficient. Like there's got to be don't just do it for the sake of doing it. So there's got to make sure you're clear on what return you would like to see before making kind of any investment. I would say that has been a challenge for us as well, because obviously there's lots of excitement that comes around that, and we encourage a community of people to engage with AI and the tools that are available, and that's a really valuable way of people spending their time, because often they are people that are really passionate about engaging in that, and that's where a lot of these new things that we're now using have come from. But it gets to a point where there's so much momentum, you're like, okay, let's just sort of focus our time a little bit on the ones that are really going to be a dial shift on what we're trying to achieve.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for discussing all these topics today. It's been really interesting listening to you kind of dissect them. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, everyone. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.